pictures. They won't last long. It is a beautiful, beautiful day. You know, I want to bring a message this morning that probably is a question that many of us, even as believers, find a little bit intimidating. I don't know if you've ever asked somebody, if anybody's ever asked you, so you believe that there is a God? Is there any evidence? Is there any proof that really God exists? And you know, that's really difficult sometimes for believers to communicate, because it's kind of like there are certain things that we have in our sensory perception that we can't always point clearly and distinctly to its reality. Let me give you, for example, love. Those of you who have ever loved, or you've ever been in love, you know, you can't really measure love. You can't detect it. You can't put it on a scale. But when it happens, it can be even more real than life. You fall in love, that encounter that you've had with that person that you love, it's so real that it's even more real than life. Although you can't put it on a meter, you can't put it on a scale, you might be able to hear words of love or acts of love or sense acts of love, but it's difficult to explain it to someone who is only looking for it through their senses. And so this morning I want to look at just the evidence that is there for anyone that might be a skeptic. And I call them an open-minded skeptic. If you've got an outline, you want to come along with me this morning, because I believe that there's a tremendous amount of evidence for someone who is an open-minded skeptic who would come away with the conclusion that, yes, there is a lot of evidence for God's existence. Now, you and I as believers, sometimes we may be able to tell a little bit of our encounter with God, or how God is meaningful in our life. We call that sharing our story. Some people call it telling a testimony. This is how my life has become different because of God in my life. Now, you can share that with people, and you should. In fact, because you are an authority of how God has impacted your life. But frankly, there are some people that are skeptical even of your story, because they may say, well, you know, you might be well-intentioned, you might have good goals, but you may even have somewhat misunderstanding some of the phenomena that you've experienced in your life. How do you know that what you have experienced is really that genuine? So even sometimes if we share our story with some, there'll be those who don't necessarily embrace the reality of God. So your friends may think that you're sincere, perhaps even misguided, or with unsubstantiated beliefs. But the fact is that God doesn't show up on Doppler radar. We can't find him on a scope. We can't find him in a telescope or a microscope. We don't see him through our senses. I've been a believer for many, many years. I've never seen God. I've never heard an audible voice. I can't sense him with my 5 senses, but I do know when he has shown up in my life from time to time. And I know that, and if you're a believer, you've been walking with God, you understand that God shows up. And he affirms himself. But let's say that you're a skeptic. Let's say that you want to disregard that and say, well, how do I know that God really exists? Is there any objective evidence outside of your experience that would say, I can reasonably understand that there is a God? Well, I want to give you some reasons to believe. You might want to jot down some notes. So here's the first thing. The fourth reason, I'm going to give you 4 reasons this morning. The first 3 are scientific, and the fourth one is philosophical. But I want you to follow with me this morning. The reasons why we can know that there is a God. And the first one comes with the beginning of the universe. Let's look at the beginning of the universe. Since the beginning to describe it to you because I don't understand. And if I tried to describe it to you, you probably wouldn't understand it either. But basically, this is what the whole concept, the whole teaching of the theory of relativity teaches. It's a theory that says, basically, that the universe had a beginning. There was a time when it did not exist, and then suddenly there was a time that it did exist. It had a start. It had a beginning. The basic teachings is the understanding of laws of physics and science that reveal that the universe suddenly came into existence. And recent data, even as much as in the last 10 years, that's been coming from the Hubble telescope. You know, we sent that up into space some time ago. And the information that's coming back from the Hubble telescope actually validates that theory of relativity that yes, the universe did have a sudden beginning. And the information just keeps rolling in. The photographic data from Hubble reveals the universe is still expanding. And in fact, it reveals that the farther a galaxy is away, the faster it is expanding. And this recent data that's come from the telescope led scientists and physicists to conclude that Einstein was right after all. His theory is virtually universally accepted throughout the scientific world. And did you know, initially, Einstein did not like the conclusion that he came up with. And so he took a lot of energy to try to disprove that theory, try to recalculate it, to make it look as though, or perhaps they could come away to think that the universe was in fact eternal. So he tried to disprove it to no avail. Some of his colleagues tried to disprove it to no avail. And even today there are some scientists that are working to try to disprove that theory to no avail. And someone would ask, well, why is it that they don't like the conclusion? Well, could it be possible that the conclusion sounds a little bit too much like Genesis 1:1? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Suddenly, He created it. Well, let's look at that for just a moment. You see, everything has a beginning. And that's a good question. The question would be, how was it that Einstein's information in the Hubble telescope, how would that somehow prove that there is a God? Or at least give evidence that there is a God? Well, that's a good question. Everything has to have a beginning. Everything that has a beginning must have a cause. Everything that has a beginning must have a cause. If the universe had a beginning, it had to have a cause for it to come into existence. You know, that's the old adage, what came first, the chicken or the egg, right? Well, was it the egg that caused the chicken or the chicken that caused the egg? We all know that. We all know that you can have something that comes into existence. Something has to cause it to come into existence. Nothing exists without a cause. Science itself operates on the premise that everything has a cause. In fact, Einstein himself said, the scientist is possessed by a sense of universal causation. Now, this sudden expansion or existence of the universe is called by physicists and scientists as a singularity event. When it actually exploded into beginning, to exist. It's oftentimes referred to as the Big Bang. Anybody familiar here with the concept of the Big Bang? Or certainly the thought of it? Let's look at it for just a minute. Since the universe came into being, the cause of the universe must therefore predate the universe and be outside the universe. Since the universe came into being, whatever caused it, that cause must predate the universe and be outside of the universe. The universe, by its definition, is time, space, physical energy, and matter. Therefore, the cause of the universe must be beyond time, beyond space, beyond physical energy, and beyond matter. In other words, the cause of the universe must be something that is very uncannily similar to the description of God. So if you follow with me this morning, let's keep in mind that the cause of the universe must be timeless, outside of time, non-spatial, outside of the spatial dimension, in other words, outside of space, immaterial, not made of matter, that cause does not consist of physical energy, yet is powerful enough to create the entire universe, all the billions and billions of galaxies, each which has billions and billions of stars. And it's worth mentioning that the idea start with anything. There was no matter, there was no material. He just spoke and it came into existence. It's like that bumper sticker that said, I believe in the Big Bang. God said, let there be light. And bang, there it is. And many of us as believers would say, I can agree with that. That makes sense. God spoke and it became. And it started into existence. Well, then someone would say, well, then who created God? Well, that's a misunderstanding of the argument. I said everything that has a beginning has to have a cause. And since God never had a beginning, he does not need or require a cause. So we see that God is behind all of that. And so we can summarize the cosmological argument in just 5 stages. I've got this on your outline. This is not original. I'm just sharing on some good meat for you to eat on, okay? I want you to look at this. Here's the first 5 things you need to look at this morning. Whatever begins to exist must have a cause for its existence. Would you agree that's true? Whatever begins to exist must have a cause for its existence. Here's the second thing. The universe began to exist. Number 3, therefore the universe had a cause for its existence. Number 4, the attributes of the cause for the universe is being timeless, outside of space, awesomely powerful, immaterial. God is spirit, he's immaterial, and so on. These are the attributes of God. Therefore, the cause of the universe must be God. Now, I realize if a person is genuinely skeptical, they're probably not going to embrace that straight up. I understand that. And if they're closed-mindedly skeptical, they're not going to embrace that. But I'm speaking to those who are open-mindedly skeptical. Does that sound fair? Sure. Open-minded skeptical person would say, show me some evidence. Is there some evidence of reasonable belief that I can believe that God exists? Well, that idea that we just outlined there just a minute ago is precisely what Christians have embraced for over 2,000 years. The first words of the Bible, which says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, in spite of what many people have believed, science is not at odds with faith. In spite of what many people believe, science is not at odds with the belief in God. On the contrary, science actually presents compelling evidence for the existence of God. And I want to share that with you here this morning. Science is not necessarily at odds with faith in God or belief in God. In fact, science often carries great evidence for the existence of God. And I want us to look at some of those this morning. Here's the second thing that we have, the beginning of the universe. The second one would be the beginning of life. The beginning of life. Did you know the universe had to be just right in order for life to exist? Everything had to be just right. Everything had to be just right on our planet for life to exist. In fact, scientists have discovered about 50 different constants. These are laws of nature that have to be in line. 50 different constants that have to be just right in order for life to exist anywhere throughout the universe. And they discovered 4 forces of nature. And these 4 forces of nature must fall into a very narrow range in order for the possibility of life to occur. Physicists have discovered the 4 forces of nature. Let me just share with you one of them. One of them is the example of the force of gravity. Now, this is something that I've learned. I don't know this off the top of my head, but I'm just going to share with you some amazing, amazing facts about evidence that God really does exist, even for an open-minded skeptic. Look what this tells us. Did you know that if the force of gravity, for example, were to change by 1 part in 10,000 billion, relative to the total range of the strengths of the 4 forces of nature, conscious life would be impossible anywhere in the universe. Very finely tuned. If it were to be out of balance, even by that small amount. There are other parameters and constants that would have to be just right in order for there to be life anywhere in the universe. For example, did you know that the neutron, if it weren't exactly the size that it is, and what it is scientists tell us, it's about 1.001 times the mass of a proton. If it weren't exactly the way it is, then all the protons would have decayed into neutrons. as little as 1 part to 10 to the 60th power. That's 1 part in a trillion, 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 trillion. The universe would either have quickly collapsed back in on itself or expanded too swiftly for stars to appear and form. Either way, life would be impossible. Do you hear about the finely tuned universe that we have? Even more amazing is that of all of these constants, they're all independent of each other, and if any one of them is off to the smallest degree, that one would preclude me from preaching to you and you hearing my voice this morning. We wouldn't be here. The finely tuned universe that we have. In fact, Paul Davies, he's one of the leading physicists and cosmologists of our day. He makes this audacious claim. He says this, quote, "I cannot believe that our existence in this universe is a mere quirk of fate. We are truly meant to be here." Now that is an amazing story, an amazing statement from someone who does not even confess to believe in a faith in a personal God. He says, "I cannot imagine that we can simply be here by accident." You see, physicists tell us that there must be very precise parameters just to allow for the existence of life on the planet. The evidence of a fine-tuned evidence is dependent on multiple independent parameters that, if off by the smallest degree, would prohibit life, and it speaks clearly in the case of an intelligent designer who started all of it. I notice sometimes, even if you use the word intelligent design in some political circles, it makes people nervous. And I want to say, dude, is it really that big of a deal? Intelligent design? That's what we're talking about. We're talking about the fact that everything has a very specific focus and is very fine-tuned. Now look at what this says. It tells us that God has very specifically designed all of the universe and is very, very finely tuned. This is what God says of himself. Look at this verse. God says in Isaiah 40, "To whom will you compare me? Who is my equal?" asks the Holy One. "Look up into the heavens. Who created all the stars? He brings them out one after another, calling each by its name. And he counts them to see that none are lost and have strayed away. Have you never heard or understood? Don't you know that the Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of all the earth? He never grows faint or weary. No one can measure the depths of his understanding." I want to suggest to you this morning that the beginning of the universe is a strong evidence that there is a God that exists, that the beginning of life and the parameters are so finely tuned in order for life to exist, that is another strong argument for the existence of God. And the third one, I think, is the beginning of information. The beginning of information. In order for life to appear, in order for it to continue on, you have to have information. You have to have a lot of matter, material stuff, and you have to have a boatload of information in order for it to begin and for it to replicate and for it to continue. And you can't get off the ground unless you have those kinds of things. Let's look at matter, the material that makes up living organisms. There's a joke out on the internet, maybe you've seen it before. I thought it'd be kind of appropriate to share right now. One day a group of scientists got together and they decided that humankind had come a long way and they no longer needed God. So they picked up one scientist and they told him to go tell God that they were done with him. The scientist walked up to God and said, "God, we've decided we no longer need you. We're to the point where we can clone people and we can do many miraculous things. So why don't you just go on and mind your own business?" God listened very patiently to the man. And after the scientist was done talking, God said, "Very well. How about this? Let's say we have a people-making contest." To which the scientist replied, "Okay, we can handle that. But," God added, "we're going to do it just like I did in the old days with Adam." The scientist said, "Sure, no problem." And he bent down and grabbed himself a handful of dirt. God looked at him and said, No, you go get your own dirt." You have to begin with something first, don't you? You got to get the materials, got to get started. In fact, even the agnostic astronomer Carl Sagan conceded, if you wish to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe. You got to have some material to work with. I mean, it's just not there. It's got to be there. So where does it come from? So where does that vast amount of raw stuff in the universe come from? And as scientists believe that all the universe, all the matter, time itself began at the Big Bang. And I want to tell you, I don't have a problem with the Big Bang. I don't have a problem with that. God said, let there be light. Bang, there it is. I believe there's a lot of evidence to that. And so all scientists and physicists say, yes, absolutely. It all began in this one singularity event. It was a cataclysmic explosion. That singularity event where the molecules of all the billions of stars, planets, solar systems, galaxies were compressed into infinitesimally small points, smaller than the point of a pin. All that matter was compressed into that small point. Then suddenly it exploded outward from that point to form the universe. It's interesting to note every now and then, you hear people say they're kind of skeptical about fantastical stories that they read in the Bible. And they'll say things like, well, I don't know that I can believe the Bible because it's full of myths. I mean, after all, you've got Moses parting the Red Sea, and there's Jonah being swallowed by a whale. Well, the Bible actually says it was a big fish. Or Jesus walking on the water. And I don't know that I can really embrace those stories because it just sounds a little too fantastical. It just seems to be a little bit beyond my comprehension. Well, the fact is, we need to remind our friends that there are a lot of things that are also fantastical, including natural phenomena. There's a lot of things in the world that are natural that really are sometimes hard to get your head around. Let me give you an example. Just try to wrap your mind around the idea of what scientists tell us about the Big Bang. That our universe that exists as a gargantuan expanse of constellations, galaxies, stars, planets, black holes, antimatter, dark energy, and then you try to imagine all of that was compressed into an infinitesimally small point, smaller than the point of a pin, becoming incomprehensibly hot. Then suddenly, and nobody knows why, it explodes and begins to expand eons and eons ago. Marilyn Vos Savant, reported to have the highest IQ ever recorded, wrote this. She says, I think that if it had been a religion that first maintained the notion that all the matter in the entire universe had once been contained in the area smaller than the point of a pin, scientists probably would have laughed at them. Isn't it amazing how sometimes we try to get our mind around even natural phenomena? Let me ask you that. If you can believe that, and I do, then is it really that difficult to believe that a virgin can conceive and bear a son? Is it really that difficult that when that son is crucified and buried that he rose again? Is it really that difficult that he can actually walk on water? Listen, we're talking about a being that can speak the whole heavens into existence. Is anything too difficult for a being like that? You see, the fact is, oftentimes, skeptics or critics don't really understand what all the evidence is, and really begin to look at it with an open mind. Is it possible that God could be behind the whole universe? Is it possible that he could be behind the fine-tuning of life? Is it possible that he could be the one who has orchestrated the life and existence that we know? Well, it does sound like science fiction. In fact, if you think about that, all the matter in the world put down into some little tiny point, that almost sounds like science fiction. But you know what? We believe it because, number one, the laws of physics back it up. The evidence backs it up. The authorities that understand it and present it. And also the fact that it sounds tremendously just like Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created everything that there is. He spoke and it came into existence. Is it really that difficult to believe that the universe can be created like that? And let's look at, for example, the information that's needed for the complexity of life. Let me give you some information here. Cambridge-trained philosopher of science, Stephen Meyer, said this. He says, consider what you'd need for the protein molecule to form by chance, just by random second amino acids come in right-handed, left-handed versions. Those who are southpaws are really proud of that. But this is what's good for your left-handed. You'd be proud of this. You've got to have only left-handed ones. So amino acids come in right-handed, left-handed ones. He says you have to have only left-handed ones. Third, the amino acids must line up in a specified sequence like letters in a sentence. Run the odds of these things falling into place on their own, and you'd find the probabilities of forming a rather short functional protein at random would be 1 chance in 100,000 trillion, 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 trillion. I got them on my notes. I got to come up with 10. That's 10 with 125 zeros after it. And that would only be one protein molecule, minimally complex cell would need at least 300 and 500 protein molecules. And he goes on to say, to suggest chance against those odds is really to evoke a naturalistic miracle. What are the odds? If it just happened, I'm not a gambling man, but I wouldn't gamble on those odds, would you? It just happened. Could it be possible? And that's a time when I would like to take my skeptical friend and I could just gently whisper to them, could this not be a possibility? This evidence? An intelligent designer? Design life? Is that reasonable to consider? I think it's more than just reasonable to consider. If that's what it takes just for one molecule, just for one cell in order to come into existence, that's a little close to here this morning on the fourth and the last one. And that's the beginning of a moral universe. The beginning of a moral universe. Now, I like to watch the nightly news or the news from time to time. I like to keep up on events, but after a little while I get a little overloaded because it's nothing but bad news. You ever notice that? It's always bad news. It hits the front, and at the very end they'll probably put on some little tag about a fundraiser that somebody had, or there'll be a marathon that somebody ran. It'll be kind of like a feature story to kind of lift up your spirits and all that kind of thing. Well, it's news, really bad news, because we emphasize all the bad things that are happening in the world. But I think the fourth reason why we can have confidence that there is a God is because of the universal moral universe, the goodness that is in the universe. You see, there are many stories of people who are doing bad things, but there are also some things of people doing good things and sacrificial things and things for others, even sometimes that are strangers, and good things that happen in our world. And so oftentimes atheism decries the idea that there is evil and there's suffering in the world, but we would not know evil, we would not know wrong if it weren't for the fact that we're aware of what is right. In fact, I can't tell you that something is crooked unless I've got something straight next to it that tells me that it's crooked. Did you know that that itself argues the fact that there is a moral universe and there's a moral lawgiver? You can't say that something is wrong or bad unless there is a standard that tells us what is right. And every one of us, it doesn't matter if you're Christian or Muslim or atheist or agnostic, whoever it is, we all have a moral guideline where we say something is just flat out wrong. Something is just simply not right. Now, can the Big Bang explain that a universe of morals and convictions and right and wrong came out of an explosion? Well, of course it can. No one really believes that morality and moral values come out of explosions. So where did they come from? Well, atheists are hard-pressed to answer it. But I want you to read for you what an atheist wrote recently out of American Thinker magazine, March 25th, 2010. You can look it up on the internet. And this is what he wrote. And the article was entitled, Secularism's Ongoing Debt to Christianity. This is what he says. He says, although I'm a secularist atheist, if you will, he says, I accept that the great majority of people would be morally and spiritually lost without religion. Can anyone seriously argue that crime and debauchery are not held in check by religion? Is it not comforting to live in a community where the rule of law and fairness are respected? Would such be likely if Christianity were not there to provide a moral compass to a great majority? Do we secularists not benefit out of all proportion from the morally responsible society? cite no overriding authority other than that of fashion. For the great majority in the West is the Judeo-Christian tradition which offers a template. So what's he saying? He's saying, I'm an atheist, I'm a secularist. He says, but there is this overarching value of morality that doesn't come from a secularist. In fact, he says, we can't find any basis on which to anchor our values of right and wrong. Where did he get that from? He says, basically, it's an identity of what God has already recorded of what is right and wrong. Moses, he even quotes, Moses comes down from the mountain, and he gives this list of rules. He says, what greater concise plan of right and wrong, or definition of right and wrong, could there possibly be? Now see, here's the fact. Many people who don't believe in God can be very moral. They can have integrity. They can have all kinds of values, and many of them are. But on where do they get that? Where do they get that differentiation of right and wrong? For example, you can go to different cultures, and maybe a different culture doesn't do things like you do. You might think it's a little odd or strange. I remember years ago, when my daughters were little, particularly Joy was little, she liked to run around without her shoes and always eat with her hands. And I kept telling her, honey, just put your shoes on, don't take your shoes off, and don't eat with your food with your hands. And we moved to India, and what do? They take their shoes off and come down and eat with their hands. And we began to realize that, you know what, different cultures do things differently. Now that's something that's unusual in the culture, and we would not say that that is wrong. But we would all say that what Hitler did was evil. Whether you're atheist, agnostic, whether you're Christian or Jew or whatever you might be, you'd say what he did was evil. It was wrong. It was evil. It was unjust. It was wrong, the wrong thing to do. We would say Saddam Hussein gassed the Kurds and killed his own family and others around him. What he did was wrong. It was evil. Now, where did we get that understanding that it was wrong? It's universal. It didn't come from an explosion. It didn't come from the Big Bang. You know what the Bible tells us? The Bible tells us the sense of right and wrong is innate within our heart. No matter where we are, you can go around the different places in the world and you recognize that people realize what is right and wrong. You know, there was an anthropologist that was making his way through a jungle, and he comes upon a headhunter that's sitting down at a big boiling pot, and next to the boiling pot, the headhunter is sitting there reading a Bible. And the anthropologist said to him, he says, my dear man, that book is outdated. It's rejected by learned minds. It's old-fashioned. It's unnecessary. The headhunter said, you may think this book is unnecessary, but if it weren't for this Bible, you would be in this pot. It changes people, doesn't it? You see, different cultures have different views on certain things. Some cultures say you should eat your enemies. Jesus said you should love your enemies. Big difference. But where does the morality come from? Where does it come from? We know what people do that's wrong. We recognize that it's wrong. But we have to have a universal sense of good. Here's the fact. The things of goodness flows out of God's very nature. We have an awareness of right and wrong. Romans 2:15, notice it on your outline, says, they demonstrate that God's law is written in their hearts. For their own conscience and thoughts either accuse them or tell them that they're doing right. This is powerful evidence for God. There is a sense of right and wrong. You can go almost anywhere, any culture around the world, and wherever the culture is, they know that killing someone outright, that's wrong. They know that taking your neighbor's wife is wrong. They know that lying and being dishonest, they know that that's wrong. They know those things are wrong. And where do they get that from? Well, the scripture says that God has written that consciousness, that awareness upon the heart of men. And that in itself tells us that there's a moral lawgiver. And the fact that there is a universal sense of right and wrong. And this is powerful evidence for God. We can put this evidence in the form of a simple argument. And I'll let you look at this on your outline. First of all, if God does not exist, then objective moral values do not exist. But we know that objective moral values do exist. Therefore, God exists. Where did they come from? They didn't come from space or time or explosion. summarize this in just this one thought. The cumulative, and I just kind of scratched the surface. I just scratched the surface. You define so much more. But the cumulative evidence for God's existence is more